begin right on time at noontime. Others will be joining us, I'm sure. So Oscar Kwasanumis Kanupiam. My name's Chrystal Mars Baker. I'm the Education Manager at Tamaquag Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's Lunch and Learn. This free educational program has been made possible with the support of many, including the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts, the United Way, the Island Foundation, and of course, community support from donors like you. Tamaquag's theme for this year is the preservation of history, as 2025 marks the 350th anniversary of the Great Swamp Massacre, a topic we will cover this year along with many others to inform and educate on the significance of Indigenous history, perspective, and the changes and challenges faced by Native peoples throughout the development of what is now called America. Just a quick reminder, please place yourself on mute. Feel free to put any questions or comments in the chat, and we'll address them as time allows at the end of the presentation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Chenae Bullock, founder and CEO of Mosquito Consulting, and a citizen of the Shinnecock Nation, representing the first contact tribe of Long Island and a living descendant of the Montauk people. She has gained national recognition through appearances at SXSW, Forbes, Rolling Stone, TEDx, and other prestigious platforms. Chenae's work focuses on cultural and heritage preservation, emphasizing the resurgence of traditional canoe culture among Indigenous communities on Long Island. She has organized and navigated sacred paddles through ancient waterways, including significant journeys from Shinnecock to Mashantucket Pequot and across the Long Island Sound, and a recent paddle from Boston to New York City. Mm-hmm. As a licensed indigenopathic practitioner, Chenae advocates for Indigenous health care and ancient wellness practices. She promotes cultural understanding and sustainability through her writings on environmental issues and her leadership in global water ceremonies in New York City. Mm-hmm. Her advocacy also addresses the epidemic and beached whales in Long Island. The epidemic of beach whales on Long Island, Chenae serves as the Indigenous Advisory Council for Shinnecock Bay, recognized for its successful restoration efforts. Her mission is to enhance the understanding of Indigenous peoples through cultural competency in government and environmental sectors, fostering meaningful connections to humanity. Her presentation today is entitled Indigenous Wisdom, Our Connection and Responsibility to Water. So I welcome Chenae Bullock.
Thank you. Tabutne. Akwe natasuisa kampanayu mashuna tuiuskwa, nacha shayawong Shinnecock, nacha payawong Turtle Clan. My given name is Eileen Canoe. I'm Butterfly Woman, and I am an enrolled citizen of the Shinnecock Nation. I am calling in from, I love to do what we call a virtual land acknowledgement, a living land acknowledgement. I travel a lot, but I'm very honored to say that I'm actually calling in from my traditional homelands of the Shinnecock people, first contacted peoples here on the shores of Long Island, New York. So I want to jump into this presentation today. I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to jump into what I've prepared to talk about today. So as we mentioned, the title of today's presentation is Indigenous Wisdom, Our Connection and Responsibility to Water. As we're going through these slides, I want us to kind of just do a little bit of mindfulness in the very beginning. We're all calling in from different places. We all wear different hats. But the beautiful thing that connects us all is water. And we're all made up of water. So just really acknowledging all of the water in the world at this time, the struggle that water goes through, but really the beauty that water has. I just want us to kind of take a moment to really put our intentions towards water as we begin to have this discussion today. Yes. So next slide, I'm going to go through here. So when I talk about the indigenous wisdom of our connection and responsibility to water, my intention is to offer a profound and timely exploration of the sacred relationship that we have as indigenous people in our communities and water by highlighting our wisdom and cultural traditions that have sustained our communities for generations. I want to underscore the urgent need for environmental responsibility and the critical role that Indigenous knowledge can play in addressing contemporary water issues. When you see this portrait here, this painting was done by a Shinnecock tribal citizen. His name is David Bun Martin. Many of you all might know his work. If you just type in Shinnecock artist, he comes up. But I've spent some time with him to learn that his paintings came from visions. And as a historian, anthropologist, he's done a lot of work about who we are as Shinnecock people. And this is what his vision was when he heard about or learned about or remembered. We call it collective memory and genetic memory, when he remembered what our whale ceremonies look like. And that's what this is. So when we talk about that wisdom, we're able to, go back to remember some of these things. And that's what our ceremonies help us do. Here in Long Island, we still practice these whale ceremonies, right? We still, we'll get into it later on in some of the work that we're doing when it comes to beach whales and taking care of our relatives. But it all goes back to our creation story. Creation story can take 7 days to tell, so I'm not going to take up too much time to really go into the depths of it. But the whale is a big part of our creation story here on the East Coast, and it holds a very, very sacred bundle of knowledge, and it holds that wisdom. And, when we come to ceremonies, we begin to share what those teachings are. And those teachings, help us understand what our responsibility is. And so a part of my responsibility is to share that this responsibility is not just an Indigenous responsibility. It is a responsibility of all humankind and all living things to take care of the water. And so all that, knowledge and wisdom is usually held within that whale. And so that's why when you see this beautiful painting here, you see that our ancestors here on Long Island, have been doing this, upholding this responsibility for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Our sacred relationship between our indigenous communities and water, it's very, very deep. Here's another beautiful, I love using David's paintings because this here is a painting of our indigenous, homelands here in Long Island. Just the other day, I actually was walking, to look at a cultural site here within our homelands. And it still looks like this because our lands here on Shinnecock territory is still untouched, right? Where we don't build, on the shoreline. We still allow the wetlands, to be in its natural habitat. But unfortunately, there has been a lot of destruction, since this time that we're seeing this beautiful painting kind of be depicted in up until today. But we do our best here on Shinnecock to make sure that we can restore those habitats, but what we were at that time, we lived in harmony, right? We understood what our responsibility was to the water, but we also understood natural infrastructure. We were just walking in trails that have been walked on since time immemorial, and also being able to see some of these traditional ways that they were able to navigate through some of those wetlands where you can see paths, between one wetland to another wetland that, is only used and operated by who we are as Shinnecock people, because this land that we are on has not been ever taken from us and we've never left it. So there's a very sacred relationship between us and these waterways, because it's generation after generation after generation after generation after generation after generation that these stories are passed down. And so now it's my responsibility to make sure that we still maintain these relationships, but we also maintain our responsibility to each other and sharing, what these waterways have been used for. And so this is a beautiful, another beautiful painting by David Martine, and what his vision, when he remembers, what it once looked like and how it once was used, as you can see here. So a little bit of the work that I do, that was a beautiful introduction that was given about me and some of the work that I do, but I focus on preserving our cultural traditions and our wellness practices. It's important to document and safeguard traditional water-related practices and customs of Indigenous communities. There are cultural stewards who still practice Indigenous healing and ceremonies that honor the sacredness of water. Our efforts to pass traditional water-related knowledge and practices to younger generations serves as a powerful testament to the deep and enduring connection between Indigenous communities and the vital resource of water. And what I mean by that is, as mentioned, I am a licensed practitioner of indigenopathic medicine. It is a medicine that really focuses not on the westernized, globalized, secular perspective of wellness and medicine, but really on a spiritual and cultural practice of medicine. And with that, that includes our environment. That includes the science that makes up our body and the environment. We believe that the earth is alive. Water holds memory. But we also understand that through the day-to-day stresses, all of the different types of diagnoses that come out through mental health, through different types of diseases that are, coming about or coming back. The land has the ability to heal all things. But we have to be able to have the knowledge on how to access that, right? In the most respectable manner, not by extracting all things from the land for ourselves, but by giving back in those different ways. And right now, our planet is in the need of us getting back to those traditions so that way the land can produce all of those things that can provide healing for us. So that's where our cultural traditions come into place, as well as those healing practices come into place. So some of that, and I guess in a modern way, looks like healing research initiatives. And some of those research initiatives that I'm working on is partnered with Nukatiem Research Institute. That's where I got my license to become an indigenopathic practitioner, and conducting research on Indigenous health challenges and solutions. Some of those health challenges, like I mentioned, whether it's mental health, most people say PTSD. What Nukatiem research has been able to do over the last 2 years is create new health codes that include the cultural and spiritual clinical analysis on our mental health. And that's called unspecified spiritual adjustment disorders. And there are new health codes for that. And understanding as an practitioner, indigenopathic practitioner, understanding how to properly create initiatives to treat those illnesses that we have as Indigenous people. The development of evidence-based programs that integrate traditional knowledge and contemporary health practices. And all of these things happen, as we get back to our cultural practices, like I just mentioned, and our healing practices. And so that cultural healing research initiative is very important for us to come together. Most people see our tribes, we have powwows, we have various things that we do annually. I think I was just hearing a little earlier about the Great Swamp Massacre. There's a lot of things that cause what we called unspecified spiritual adjustment disorder, the interruption of our cultural practices, the interruption of our spiritual understanding, the interruption of our connection to certain waterways, not having beach access, all of those things, unfortunately, cause more stress and more disparities within our own individual selves, within our own clan systems, within our own tribes, and within our own region. And so, as you see what's happening with the indigenous people through these different illnesses, you also see sicknesses happen to the water and the land because of the unfortunate separation and trauma that has happened between and to both indigenous people and indigenous land. And so through some of these initiatives that I'm working on, it's to help get us back to these traditional practices so that we can heal ourselves and others and get back to taking care of our land and waterways. So some of that, this is kind of a new thing that's happening. I won't say new. It's been happening here in Long Island since time immemorial. We've been taking care of our waterways and our, podum, the whale. But we're now able to do some collaborative conservation with, what we have. It's called Atlantic Marine Conservation Society and the indigenous people of Long Island, particularly Shinnecock, Unkechaug, Matinecock, and Montauk tribes. We have emerged as a successful model for marine conservation, focusing on the preservation of whales and the stability of our ocean resources. This partnership highlights the importance of combining scientific research and traditional ecological knowledge to address critical environmental issues. And so I just have a couple of photos here. The photo on the bottom is was exhibited actually in a few different museums, but this is by a Shinnecock artist named Courtney Leonard. Many of you might know who she is. She's a well-renowned, artisan, but she always focuses on, the ocean sustainability and our culture when it comes to water and our culture when it comes to sea life and marine life. And so this was an exhibit that she had. At the top there on the far right, you'll see myself with a baby minke whale. This minke whale actually beached itself because it was sick. And usually what happens is the whales, when they are going to die, they usually come into more shallow waters for a few days, and then they sort of give themselves to the beach, to the shore. And there's some teachings that we have within that, that it's time, the whales are starting to give themselves because the people are ready for more knowledge. And it's unfortunate that it's happening at the rate that it's happening in very interesting ways. And so there's a few people here in Long Island that have partnered with the Atlantic Marine Conservation Society to try to figure out why is this happening at such alarming rate. We're noticing that the whales are beginning to eat a diet that they typically do not eat. The reasons sometimes for them beaching themselves in particular areas is alarming, and so that research is being done, and also on sea turtles. So our connection, our sacred relationship to whales and to the life in the water and the water itself is now being not only acknowledged but respected and collaborated with many organizations here throughout Long Island. And it's really just been a beautiful thing to see happening. Like I mentioned, we have a whale ceremony that we've brought back. I think last year would have been our 6th year. This year would make it our 7th. And we do that at the end of the year. And this is something that our ancestors have been doing, but we've been able to bring that whale ceremony back to our homelands. And this year and the year before that, we've been opening it to our sister tribes to be able to come and participate. And the Atlantic Marine Conservation Society came for the first time this year. And it's been really beautiful to see, the work around, trying to save these whales. It's a global epidemic. It's not just something that's happening here in Long Island, but it's also a global responsibility and not just an Indigenous responsibility as well to take care of this work. Um, Ecotourism is a little bit of what I do here in Long Island. I think this is the fun part. As you can see, I'm not really bad at talking, um, and I love being in the water. And so about maybe 4 years ago, right during the pandemic, people were really starting to take a liking to really doing more outdoor activities, and so I brought people together in what's called the first point of contact here in New York, Conscious Point. Conscious Point was the first point of contact between the Shinnecock and those settlers that came in the early mid 1600s. And so I give a small tour, a paddle tour, Indigenous perspective paddle tour there at Conscious Point. And we touch on a lot of different topics. We touch on the Indigenous history, the ecology. We touch on the importance of stewarding relationships, not only with the land and the water, but with each other, and it really truly shows that water connects everything. We talk about the indigenous plants that are endangered, from the eelgrass to, the rockweed, to the mussels and the shellfish and the oysters, to the crabs and all of the different aquatic life within our marinas here. But I also talk upon what is causing them to be endangered and what individuals can do as taxpayers, voters within this small town of Southampton, as well as what they might be able to do in supporting the efforts that Indigenous people in this particular town, Shinnecock, are doing to preserve, not only just our culture, but the water, preserve the health of the water and preserve the health of the life around and within the water. So that's what a little bit of the ecotourism that I do, whether it's paddle tours, sometimes private paddle tours or group paddle tours, but also plant identification walks. Plants are not separate from water. Plants need water, right? So I often try to make sure that I'm giving like my plant walks or hiking tours somewhere where we can either end or start or stop by a body of water along the way, because water always should be included, in my understanding, when we're talking about plants and life should always be included because it is the source of life, water. Another thing that we are doing to preserve this, and again this is our responsibility, is reviving our canoe culture. We have been paddling. Shinnecock has been a part of the Northwest Tribal Canoe Journeys, going on almost 11 years. We've been going for 11 years. I guess this would probably be year 15 if we went back. But we've been going for 11 years. But we've also been able to have different elders within our tribal community. You probably can't see them in the back of the canoe there. They've got like the paddles in front of their face, but they've been doing a lot of this work for over 40 years. And the beautiful thing is that they've been passing down their relationships. They've been passing down the wisdom. They've been passing down some of their dreams and some of their visions, and whatever it is that they know down to the next generation, who is active, right? And so we're saying, okay, well, we want to paddle. We want to go to tribal canoe journeys. And so we've been able to bring youth to that. But also what we've been able to see is as we've been going to these tribal canoe journeys each year, then we come back and then there's more efforts here on the East Coast that we're beginning to see take place. In Shinnecock, we have a canoe race that takes place during powwow, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And Shinnecock is not the only tribe that's doing this. We see the tribes in Massachusetts and Rhode Island and Connecticut. We see the reviving of the canoe culture, whether it is, making mashoons, making paddles, remembering paddle songs, old paddle songs, remembering the traditions of how to be in the canoe. I was able to do a paddle from Boston to New York City. And we included the Penobscot were involved in that, the Oneida, the Onondaga. And we made sure that we stopped along the way to Narragansett, to Massachusetts tribes, to some of the Wampanoag tribes, and even some of the Connecticut tribes. And as we came through Long Island, we were able to stop in Cutchogue territory. We were able to stop in all these different places. And what that does is it awakens the land. So we're not only reviving, just paddling, you're reviving the traditions that are incorporated in who we are as canoe people, as water people. If our ancestors were whalers, you had navigators, you had captains, you had pacers, you had boat makers, you had paddle makers, you had grounds crew, you had, people that they had all this wisdom and what their responsibility was, not only to the water, but to each other as a people. And that's what I mean when we say that we're reviving that. We're reviving that culture within itself. In 2 weeks, I have been commissioned to burn a traditional canoe for the Long Island Children's Museum. And one of the things that I proposed to them was that I won't just be, just making another canoe for a museum. I've done that for close to 15 years. But we are a living culture. We have a living culture of our canoe ways. And so therefore, we're not just making something to put on display. We need to be able to use it. And so when I proposed that to them, they are gifting me the second Mashun to me to be able to utilize to help in the resurgence of our canoe culture. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. So that's another thing that we're doing. And that's another responsibility that we have is reviving it, resurging it, and preserving it and maintaining it, our canoe culture. The wisdom of Indigenous knowledge. There's many different ways to break this down. But the respect for water as a living entity is, I would say, probably the number one thing. My body, your bodies, is made up of, more than 85% of water. I always tell people that. And therefore, when we are drinking water, when we're near water, when we're working with water, when we're working in water, or we're working for water or around water, we have to be able to respect it because water carries energy. So the energy that we have around it is transferred, from one place to another place, or from one person or one living being to another living being. It's very important that we understand that it is a living entity and we respect it as such. The holistic approach to water stewardship kind of includes that kind of mindset that I was talking about, the interconnectedness of all elements within the natural world, including water. This holistic approach can be a guide, integrated into water management strategies, that consider the diverse needs of ecosystems, communities, and future generations. It's very hard sometimes for people to approach things from a holistic standpoint because they have been so conditioned for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years to not really understand or even respect a holistic approach. But I think it's wise for us to be open to something different based upon the unfortunate tragic of water pollution and water wars. I think it's important for us to maybe come in with a more nurturing, holistic approach to water stewardship. Traditional ecological knowledge, very important. We kind of touched on that, helps us understand, from our traditional instructions, every community is different, every community lives in a different place. And so their approach to water could be different. Shinnecock lives directly on the ocean. When I step outside on the porch at nighttime, I can hear the ocean. I can hear it. Most people, if they're not from here, they might think it's a train. They might think it's a plane. But when you realize that that sound doesn't stop, I can say that's the ocean that you're hearing. And so there's a knowledge that we have as Shinnecock people when it comes to the ocean. We have a deep, deep relationship with that. But if I were to go to Western Massachusetts, where they have, mountains and they have rain and they have different ponds and different lakes and different streams and different creeks and different rivers, they're going to have a very different approach, different understanding of water too. But that doesn't make either one, the same or right or wrong. It just shows that there's a deep connection that we all have and the responsibility that we have. And that traditional ecological knowledge is very important to respect and include when we're making, global decisions on water. Sustainable water use practices. There are ancient, I like to call it ancient sustainability, ancient sustainable water use practices, from capturing water to using water to how to clean, different variations of things with water. It's very important on how to respect some of those ancient sustainable practices, but how they can be engineered and scaled to be utilized in today's society. Inclusive water governance. Indigenous communities have often established frameworks for inclusive community-based water governance. Incorporating these participatory decision-making approaches can help ensure that water management policies and practices reflect the needs and perspectives of diverse stakeholders. In our traditional communities, our governance system was given to us as a gift from Creator in our creation time. And when those instructions were given, you had clan system, typically usually 13 different clans. And every different tribe might have a different clan represented. But the system itself, each clan had a different responsibility, and they worked together. And the people within those clans understood what those responsibilities were. So they understood what their role was within the community. So when the structure of the governance is put into place, we essentially have tried to follow just that. But when there's an interruption of outside influences, it makes it very hard sometimes to have that participatory decision-making, process. But we strive to get back to those ways of doing that. Again, because water is what connects all of us to be able to do that. This is just a little quote that I have. We have a sacred responsibility to protect the water, for without water, there is no life. And this is just a picture of me after ceremonies, just jumping in the water. I think I still have makeup on. You can probably see the red paint. I still have all my jewelry on. And this is in what's called the Peconic Bay. It is right on Shinnecock territory in our what we call West Woods, land. And West Woods was a place that our people here that live on what's called the neck, closer to the ocean, would go over, and that's where we would get our deadfall and bring it back over to this side. And so that's the Peconic Bay side towards the north, and where I'm at is the Southampton, Shinnecock Bay side towards the south. And again, you can't talk about plants without water, and you can't talk about water without life. So water produces indigenous plants, such as this large mullein, or maybe I'm short, whichever one you want to decide, whether the mullein is just really tall or I'm just really short. But mullein is a very popular plant that grows around not only Shinnecock here, but there at Tamaquah Museum, Narragansett Territory, and all over. But it is one of those plants that we use quite a bit. So we really appreciate a good rain like today to produce such life. And then we have rockweed. Here is a photograph of myself and one of my sister cousins, distant relatives from Mashpee. We were paddling around Shinnecock, getting ready to prepare for a clam bake. And so We got some rockweed that grows around our shorelines here. And that rockweed is what we use to cover the bake because it's thick with salt and water. And it really, really preserves, the moisture that's needed so that the food doesn't burn. So water is very important to preserve because if this water was polluted, then we would not be able to use that rockweed or eat any of those mussels that are growing along, the banks there. Um, so I like to say call for participation versus call for action, call to action, right? The thing about water is it connects us all. And here is a photo during what we call World Oceans Day. This was like the day before World Oceans Day. And a few tribal members from Shinnecock, Montauk, Matinecock, Unkachug, as well as Onondaga, um, Ramapo, Lenape, Sand Hill, Lenape, Nanticoke, Lenape, and Lenape actually was able to paddle down the upper Hudson into the lower Hudson um, Bay to greet the Hukalea in 2017 or 2016, I believe. And we called for participation around the world as we created a declaration for what's happening with our oceans. So the high seas people from the high seas islands, there in the Polynesian areas, they called a declaration. And so that was a call for participation. And when we come together around water, then we're really, really connecting on what all of our responsibilities are, to water. And so I just want to say thank you. I hope whatever I was able to share with you all maybe spark some interest. Maybe really, might have been something new that I was sharing. But I think it's really important for us to understand that we all have a responsibility to water. We're moving in times where it's going to take all of us coming together and sharing what our knowledges are into to preserving it, but also just being mindful that water is a living entity. So thank you.
I see it. In terms of water pollution, does Indigenous wisdom offer any ways to reverse the problems of pesticides and also the vast amount of antibacterial sanitizer solutions that are now in our water?
That's a great question. Well, I will say I'm not a water scientist where I would nerd out on this, but this is definitely something that I think I'm going to nerd out to really understand a little better. Um, I will say that it really starts with just making sure that people are held accountable. For example, here, I think in the photo that I showed you where I was giving the ecotourism slide, um, around that area are homes, right? And this is a bay, well, like sort of a cove outside of a larger bay. Um, Around that particular area, uh, it's illegal for people to build on their property what we call bulkheads. It's illegal for them to do that, but they're still doing it. So that's what I mean by accountability. People themselves are the ones that are putting this inside of the water. This isn't a unnatural thing that we're seeing. I've also seen some scientific evidence from the Mountain Valley Pipeline Resistance Coalition, which is in like Burlington, North Carolina. They've been able to show evidence of just pollution over time with water. But what we do find is what those keystone species, such as mussels, whether they're freshwater mussels, freshwater clams, freshwater, any kind of freshwater, shellfish, but also any kind of saltwater shellfish, those are usually the ones that help to clean out your water. You don't want to eat them, obviously, if your water is polluted. But it's important for us to be able to make sure that we are creating a safe habitat for them to grow, because if not, then you'll just have all this pollution and no way to naturally clean the water. So we as Indigenous people, we work with all of the life that's in the water. And it's really those shellfish. Um, but I would say holding, those people accountable that are doing this polluting is all of our responsibility.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Jason Lillis asks, from the slide, the wisdom of Indigenous knowledge, I'm curious what water harvesting and storage, if that's the right term, look like.
Well, gourds are amazing. We have a tribal member here on territory. He's actually a shellfishman. His name is Chuck Quinn. Many Narragansetts know who he is. But he grows tons and tons of gourds. And he has a way that he grows them where they grow up into the trees. So they grow long. And so, there's a way to, hollow them out. And, he grows a lot of them, so you can capture water that way if you need to, and then reuse it for plants or whatnot. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure if I could say this correctly. For me, as a Baha'i, the goal of existence is to carry forward an ever-advancing civilization. Such a civilization can only be built on an earth that can sustain itself. The wise management of all the natural resources of the planet, including water, will require a global approach since water is not a respecter of national boundaries. The use, sharing, protection, and management of water need to be governed by spiritual principles of justice and equity, and the fundamental concept of moderation. Decisions on water need to be taken through processes of consultation involving all those concerned or affected. So he doesn't have a question, but do you want to comment on anything that he just said?
No, I agree. I think when you said that, it will require a global approach. I think that is really where I'm trying to um do a little bit of enlightening for those that may not see that, but also trying to empower, because when you empower people, you have to equip people for them to do something. You can empower people and say, wow, this is okay. Yeah, you're right. But now what's the next step? They need to be equipped. What are those approaches? What can we equip them with? And once we can empower one another, or educate, empower, and equip one another, then we really can have that global approach. But that's where that respect comes into place. Indigenous ecological knowledge, indigenous governance has always been kind of looked at as like this novelty where, we come to the powwow, people eat fry bread, and Native Americans talk about, what we once did. But it's important to respect the current governance, the current traditions, and the current approaches that we are taking when it comes to, our water sovereignty. And that is not just an indigenous thing, it's a global thing. So I agree with you on that approach.
Another question, from Russ Cohen. I'm curious to know if you know about any initiatives in your area to bestow legal personhood type rights. I'm not sure what TOV stands for, but TOV water, as is being done in other areas.
I do not. I don't have the answer to that question. Sorry. I don't.
Okay. He did put a link in the chat in case anyone wants to click on that. Maybe that will give a little more information. Hold on, there was a couple more. My chat disappeared. Sorry. A few comments of thanks. Very informative and much appreciated. The ancestors have been speaking to me about water, my sister. Okay. Mark Cordell asks, how do you use the mullein plant?
Well, I use the mullein plant in multiple different ways, depending on what I need. I love to drink it as a tea. I like to add mullein with other, medicines because mullein to me doesn't really have like a strong flavor, so it's a good supporter to the other, so if you like mint, you like the flavor of mint, add mullein because of the benefits that mullein has. If you like raspberry, you just want the flavor of raspberry or hibiscus, add mullein because of its, properties. I love to have it as a tea, but I'm also the type of person that I use the medicine when I need it. So I'm not going to use it for flavor. So like, okay, I can feel that I'm congested. I've got some things going on. I'm going to have some tea. If I'm super congested, where, allergy season's here, half of my face is like not opening up. I can't breathe out of this one. My eyes all watery, my ears, all that stuff. I'm going to put a nice, like handful of whatever I have of mullein, and I'm going to put it in a pot and I'm going to steam my face over it, probably like twice a day, as soon as I wake up, and then before I go to bed, that kind of thing. So steaming, tea form, and then I don't use it that often, but there is a benefit to consuming it by smoke. There is a benefit, so if you do have a small pipe, um, I like to say pipes versus burning whatever kind of paper or something. Our ancestors always had various pipes for different reasons. You can add it in, there. I have also gone to the extent of putting it in my sauna. I have a like a pop-up sauna. Um, and so I will, you want to make sure you're using the herbs that your body is able to have on itself. You don't want to put anything that's going to burn your eyes. Just because you can consume something as a tea doesn't always mean that your whole body should have that steamed. So I like to make, like, what we call a kinnikinnick, which means mixture of medicine. And I add mullein in it. So if I'm really having like some strong congestion, um, after COVID, if someone has had COVID for a while, and then they're finally better and they're testing, negative and they don't have it, it would be good to probably sit in a sauna with some mullein and do some deep, deep, deep breath work, deep breathing, because bacteria in certain parts of those that disease can host into different parts of your body that you may not have been able to get out just by saying, okay, I'm better. You need to get that medicine deep down in there and really breathe it out. So I use it in all of those ways. Mullein is a great plant. As you can see, I can talk forever on just mullein.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Where will you be celebrating World Ocean Day 2025? And are non-tribal members able to paddle?
I am not really sure where I don't really have a big schedule for that particular day. I will most likely, I actually might be in ceremony, I think. I might be in spring ceremonies. Um, I don't believe that I will be doing another paddle. That particular paddle was like a one-time thing because it was a hukalea. A hukalea is a voyaging society. They were voyaging for 2 years without any modern day navigation. They used their ancient indigenous wisdom of the constellation map. And so that particular year happened to fall on the same time that they were doing that. And so that's what I did there. But I would always suggest, if you could get to the ocean, if you could get involved in, more virtual talks like this that are happening around that time, anything that can allow you to be focused on your intention towards the ocean, I think would be great. See what your local tribes are doing that might be public, that you can attend. Um, but for me, I think we will be in closed ceremony, our Sequan ceremonies around that time, and preparing for Strawberry Thanksgiving.
It looks like someone is wondering if you could provide the email contact. Tony Brooks is looking to see if you could provide an email contact for the person who makes the gourds.
Oh, you know what? He doesn't, he's real old school. He don't have no email. He doesn't have an email there. However, if you ever come to Shinnecock Powwow, he often sometimes will have, if he doesn't have a booth, he usually has some readily available, but and I could also see, I know that sometimes Tamaqua Museum usually does like some really neat artisan days and booths and stuff. And so maybe I can see about getting some up to the museum there that they might be able to have for sale or something. That would be something that we could look into.
Yeah, we can look into that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Mark Alio said, great presentation, Chenae. Gerald Kraus. Okay, I think you may have already answered that. When and where are these canoe events taking place? And so I think you answered that unless there's a different.
So my canoe events, let's see. So I'm in the process of doing some rebranding, but I'll put my website here in the chat. You should be able to go onto that website and subscribe. Once you subscribe, that's where I usually put out the information as it comes up that you all can get involved in. And we have been able to have um, a relative from Narragansett. He got up really early one day, made the ferry, and he was able to make it out to the paddle. We've had some students from some Indigenous students in the Indigenous program at University of Connecticut, as well as Yale, come out. We've had people come down from Maine, New Jersey. We've had people drive up from Delaware. It's a really amazing time. But again, I can also do private tours too. So if you ever just want to come over to Long Island for a day trip, let me know, and we can plan something.
Beautiful. And thank you for providing the website. Someone else was looking for your website.
Okay.
Okay, so Russ Cohen put, I don't know how to do this though, Russ. I'm sorry. He's hoping that you can identify what this is a photo of
It
from your
was the
talk.
photograph. I was able to open it. It's the photograph
Open.
of what's her name's art?
Oh, Courtney.
Courtney, and it looks almost like I don't know what that is in the photograph. Maybe you had a bunch, it was like a bunch of white things
Mm-hmm.
piled on top of a platform.
Yeah.
Do you know what that was? He's asking if you can
Oh,
identify
yeah.
what that was.
I don't know off the top of my head. She's a contemporary artist, so contemporary artists have, and I'm sure you probably know this. They have their own, ways of creating the vision of what they have envisioned. And so sometimes it's not exactly something, but it does represent, the connection to our sea life. But you can look her up. Her name is Courtney Leonard. I know she has a few studios. She went to RISD. She is a enrolled tribal citizen, but you can look her up and really learn more about her work. Next time, I think what I will do is probably just put the name of the exhibit in the photo so you can actually find that. But you can look her up. Her name is Courtney Leonard. And I'm sure that will come up.
Great. And I think if you didn't notice it, anyone, Silvermoon did put her in the chat. She's
Perfect.
a good text. She's fast on that. I would have still been figuring out how to do that. So
Yeah.
thank you, Silvermoon Tech. And I'm seeing more thank yous, but I don't see any more questions or any last burning questions. Thank you for a very inspiring presentation. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.
So with that, thank you, Chenae. We'd like to thank you for this very enlightening presentation.
Thank
For all
you.
of you, this presentation has been recorded and it will be made available on Tamaquag's YouTube page. So if you'd like to revisit the presentation, you'll be able to do that soon. And thank you to all of you who joined us today. I hope you will also join us next month on April 28th for a presentation with Brad Lopes, who is a Quinawampanog, entitled Sequan, where he will share historical perpetuity through relations and time. You're also welcome to join us tomorrow for Tamaquag's virtual book club. We'll meet at 7 p.m. tomorrow night to discuss Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange, a novel about a young survivor of the Sand Creek Massacre in Colorado in 1864 and the family legacy and historical significance that that massacre and that time has passed on. So all are welcome to join, whether you read the book or not. Please also follow Tamaquag Museum on Facebook and Instagram, and be sure to check out our website. We post many things on these for our events and other upcoming things, and we hope you have a lovely afternoon. Peace Kanash, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Chenae. Thank you, everyone.